My name is Emma Whitmore, I'm 34 years old and I'm an architect, and 3 years ago my parents disowned me because I married a school janitor. At least that's what they thought he was. The funny thing is, the worst part wasn't losing the inheritance. It wasn't losing access to the family money. It wasn't even hearing my father tell an entire ballroom full of people that I was no longer his daughter. The worst part was realizing that the people who raised me had only ever loved a version of me that obeyed them. The moment I stopped performing that role, they acted like I had died. What they didn't know was that the man they mocked for carrying a mop after school hours owned more of the city than they ever would. And what they definitely didn't know was that 6 months later, at my Golden Child brother's Mayoral campaign launch, that same janitor would walk onto a stage in front of 500 donors and destroy everything they thought they understood about power. But to explain that night, I need to tell you about the years that came before it, because revenge isn't usually one dramatic moment. Most of the time, it's surviving long enough to stop needing the people who hurt you. I grew up in a family that worshipped achievement the way some families worship religion. My father, Richard Whitmore, was a prominent attorney, not famous enough to appear on television, but important enough that everyone in the city knew his name. My mother, Sandra, chaired charity boards, hosted fundraisers, and spent most of her life managing appearances. Then there was my older brother, Daniel. Daniel was the future. Daniel was the pride of the family. Daniel was the person every conversation somehow returned to. When Daniel got an A, it was proof of brilliance. When I got an A, it was expected. When Daniel won debate competitions, we celebrated. When I won architecture scholarships, my parents asked why I wasn't studying law. I learned very young that love inside our house wasn't unconditional. Love was performance-based, approval was earned, attention was a resource, and Daniel received most of it. The strange thing is that nobody ever openly admitted it. That's what made it confusing. My parents never said they loved him more, they just built their entire lives around proving it. Every family vacation happened around Daniel's schedule. Every holiday dinner became a discussion about Daniel's future. Every achievement I reached became a stepping stone for a conversation about my brother. I remember one Christmas when I was 16, I'd won a statewide design competition. 3,000 students had entered. I came in first. The trophy sat beside my plate at dinner. My father looked at it for maybe 3 seconds. Then Daniel mentioned he might run for student council president. The rest of the evening became about leadership, politics, and Daniel's potential. Nobody mentioned the trophy again. I carried it back upstairs myself. I remember sitting on my bedroom floor afterward, staring at it in the dark, not crying, just staring, trying to understand why success always felt lonely. By college, I'd stopped competing for attention. That was probably my first act of self-preservation. I threw myself into architecture. Buildings made sense, structures made sense. Load-bearing walls either worked or they didn't. Steel didn't play favorites. Concrete didn't compare siblings. Physics was honest in a way people rarely were. I graduated near the top of my class. Found work with a respected architectural firm. Started building a career I genuinely loved. For the first time, I felt like my life belonged to me. Then I met Nathan. The first time I saw him, he was replacing ceiling tiles at Lincoln Elementary School. Our firm had been hired to evaluate structural issues in the older sections of the building. I was walking through a second-floor hallway carrying blueprints when I nearly walked into a ladder. A voice above me said, "Careful." I looked up. A man in work clothes balanced near the ceiling with a toolbox hanging from one arm. Dark hair, calm eyes, slight smile. The kind of smile that looked genuine because it wasn't trying to impress anyone. "Sorry," I said, "my fault." He climbed down. I noticed dust on his sleeves and paint on one boot, not messy. "Just evidence of actual work. You the architect?" he asked. I nodded. "You're looking at the north wing?" "Yeah," he pointed toward a doorway. "Check the support beam above room 12. "Something's been shifting for months." I blinked. "You noticed that?" He laughed softly. "I notice everything in this building." That should have been the end of the conversation. Instead, we spent 20 minutes discussing structural issues, then 40, then an hour. And by the time I left, I knew 2 things. First, he was incredibly intelligent. Second, he had absolutely no interest in impressing me, which made him different from almost every man I'd ever met through my family's social circles. Over the next several months, our paths crossed repeatedly. Coffee turned into lunches, lunches turned into long evening walks, walks turned into dates. Dates turned into something neither of us could pretend wasn't serious. One night, sitting on a park bench overlooking the river, I asked him a question. "What did you want to be when you were younger?" Most people answer immediately. Nathan didn't. He watched the water for several seconds, then he smiled. "Useful," I laughed. "That's not a job, maybe not," he shrugged, "but it's what I wanted." I remember thinking then that there was something unusual about him, not mysterious, not secretive, just grounded. Like someone who didn't need external validation to know who he was. I envied that because I'd spent my entire life chasing approval, and he seemed completely free of it. The first time I brought him home, disaster arrived exactly the way I expected. My mother noticed his work boots before she noticed his face. My father asked what he did within 30 seconds. "I'm facilities maintenance at Lincoln Elementary." The silence afterward felt physical, like a temperature change, like a door quietly closing somewhere. "A janitor?" my father asked. Nathan smiled politely. Partly, such a small word. At the time I barely noticed it. My father did. I saw it register, but he dismissed it immediately. Because once my father reached a conclusion about someone, new information rarely mattered. Dinner became an interrogation disguised as conversation. Where did Nathan go to school? What were his future plans? Did he intend to remain in maintenance work forever? Every answer Nathan gave was calm, patient, respectful, which somehow seemed to irritate my father even more. After Nathan left, my parents launched the offensive. My mother sat at the kitchen table looking heartbroken. My father looked furious. Neither expression was genuine, they were strategic. "You can't be serious," my father said. "I am. Emma, you're throwing away your future." "No, I'm choosing it," he laughed, not kindly. The sound still makes my stomach tight when I remember it. "A janitor, he works hard. Lots of people work hard." I stood. "So that's the issue. You think he's beneath us?" My father's silence answered the question. And in that moment, something old inside me cracked, not shattered, not dramatically, just fractured enough that I finally saw the truth. This wasn't about concern. This wasn't about protecting me. This was about status, image, reputation. They weren't evaluating Nathan's character. They were evaluating how he would look on a Christmas card. And they had failed him before learning who he actually was. The arguments continued for months. Every phone call became a negotiation. Every family gathering became a battlefield. Daniel joined in eventually. Of course he did. Golden children usually learn loyalty to the system that benefits them. One evening after dinner, he pulled me aside. "You know they're worried about you." "No, they're embarrassed," he sighed. "You could do so much better." I stared at him. "Do you hear yourself? What? You think human beings have rankings?" He rolled his eyes. "Don't be dramatic." I wasn't being dramatic. I was finally being honest. And honesty made everyone uncomfortable, because it exposed things they'd spent years pretending weren't true. Then Nathan proposed, not at an expensive restaurant, not during a vacation. Not in front of an audience. We were sitting on the hood of his truck watching a thunderstorm roll across the horizon. Rain fell somewhere in the distance. The air smelled like wet asphalt. And he simply looked at me and said, "I want every ordinary day with you." Then he held out a ring, simple, beautiful, perfect. I said yes before he finished asking. For the first time in years, I felt certain about something, completely certain, and that certainty terrified my family, because control only works when you're unsure of yourself. The official disowning happened 2 weeks before the wedding. My father invited me to his office. The same office where he'd spent decades intimidating clients, opponents, and anyone else who challenged him. I sat across from his enormous desk. He folded his hands and delivered the ultimatum. "If you marry him, you're out." The words hung between us. Cold, final, deliberate, no inheritance, no trust, no financial support, no family connections, nothing. I remember looking out the window behind him, watching sunlight reflect off nearby buildings, feeling strangely calm because I'd expected this moment for years, not this exact version. But something like it, every conditional expression of love eventually reaches a final condition. This was ours, then I'm out. His eyes widened just slightly. I don't think he'd prepared for that answer. I think he'd expected tears, negotiation, fear. Instead, I stood up and walked toward the door. "Emma," I stopped, not because I wanted to. Because some part of me still hoped, still wanted a father, still wanted him to choose me. When I turned around, he was staring at me. For 1 second, I thought maybe he'd change his mind. Maybe he'd realize what he was doing. Maybe "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." That was what he chose, not "I love you," not "Please stay," not even "I'm sorry," just judgment. I nodded, then I left, and something inside me closed quietly behind me. The wedding came 3 weeks later, and my family arrived determined to turn it into a public lesson. They succeeded at first. Because humiliation always works in the moment, the damage only becomes visible later. The reception hall glowed with soft lights, music drifted through the room, friends laughed, people danced. For a few precious hours, I managed to forget the war surrounding us. Then my father stood to make a toast. And everything changed. My father stood with a champagne glass in one hand and a microphone in the other. The room gradually quieted. Forks stopped moving. Conversations faded. The band lowered its volume. I remember looking around the room and seeing faces turn toward him, some curious, some polite, some already anticipating entertainment. My father loved audiences. He loved rooms full of people who listened when he spoke. For most of my life, I had watched him command attention the way conductors command orchestras, every movement deliberate, every word calculated, and as he stood there at my wedding reception, I knew exactly what was coming, not because I was psychic, because I was his daughter. I'd spent 34 years learning the shape of his cruelty. My daughter Emma, he began warmly, a few people smiled, has always been stubborn. Soft laughter drifted through the room. My stomach tightened even as a child. Another laugh. Whenever someone offered guidance, she'd insist on doing things her own way. People nodded politely, still harmless, still disguised as affection. Then his eyes found mine and the temperature changed. Tonight is no exception. The smile on his face never moved, but I saw it, the satisfaction, the anticipation. The certainty that he was about to win. I spent years trying to help Emma build a future worthy of her talents. The room grew quieter. Unfortunately, some people mistake good advice for control. My mother stared down at her plate. Daniel watched with the expression of someone enjoying a show, and suddenly I understood. They had discussed this, planned it, agreed to it. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't emotion. This was strategy. Still, my father continued, raising his glass. Every adult must live with their choices. A pause, perfectly timed, and Emma has certainly made hers. A few uncomfortable chuckles. Then he turned toward Nathan, the man sitting beside me, the man who had shown nothing but respect since the day he met my family, the man they had never bothered to know. I sincerely hope that life as a school janitor's wife brings her everything she believes she's giving up tonight. Silence, absolute silence. I heard somebody shift in their chair. Somewhere in the room, a glass touched a table. Tiny sounds suddenly seemed enormous, because everyone understood exactly what had happened. The insult wasn't hidden anymore. The knife had come all the way out. My father smiled, satisfied, certain, victorious. For one terrible second, I felt 14 years old again, small, ashamed, not because he was right. Because humiliation is powerful even when it's unfair. That's what people don't tell you. Being publicly mocked hurts whether you deserve it or not. My face burned, my chest tightened. And across the room I saw people avoiding my eyes, the way strangers do when they witness something embarrassing. Then Nathan stood, slowly, calmly, no anger, no panic, no embarrassment, just calm. The kind of calm that only comes from knowing something nobody else knows. He adjusted his jacket, looked at my father, and smiled. "Thank you for the toast, Richard," my father blinked. He'd expected tears or rage or silence, not gratitude. Nathan lifted his water glass. Fortunately, Emma didn't marry me for my job. A few people laughed nervously. And I certainly didn't marry her for her inheritance. Another pause, then Nathan looked at me, not my father, not the crowd, just me, and said quietly, "We'll be okay." 4 words, simple words. Yet somehow they settled every shaking piece inside me. We'll be okay, not because of money, not because of revenge, not because of secrets, because we had each other. That should have been the end. It would have been enough, but life had one final surprise waiting, and it arrived 6 months later. At Daniel's Mayoral campaign launch, the event was massive, 500 guests, business leaders, developers, local media, political donors. Every important person in the city seemed to be there. The ballroom occupied the top floor of a luxury hotel overlooking downtown. Glass walls reflected thousands of city lights. Everything looked expensive. Everything looked important. Everything looked exactly like the kind of event my family loved. By then I hadn't spoken to my father in months. My mother sent occasional texts. Daniel sent none. I had built a quiet life without them, and for the first time I was happy, genuinely happy. Our little house felt like home. My architecture firm had promoted me. Nathan and I spent weekends gardening badly and laughing about it. Peace had replaced performance. Then an invitation arrived. Daniel wanted me at the launch. My first instinct was to decline. My second instinct was stronger. I was tired of hiding, so we went. When we arrived, I immediately noticed something strange. My father looked nervous, not stressed, nervous. He kept checking his watch, scanning the room, talking to donors, then checking his phone, again and again and again. The behavior didn't fit him. Richard Whitmore was many things. Nervous wasn't one of them. "What's going on?" I asked Nathan. He smiled. "Big night." "That doesn't answer the question." "No, it doesn't." I narrowed my eyes. He laughed softly. That should have warned me, but by then I had learned something important about Nathan. When he wasn't ready to tell you something, no force on earth could drag it out of him. The program started. Speeches began, introductions followed. Daniel took the stage. Confident, polished, charismatic, he was good. I can admit that. My brother had always been talented. The problem was never his talent. The problem was the way our family worshipped it. Halfway through the evening, Daniel began thanking supporters, sponsors, donors, business leaders. Then he reached a particular name. And everything changed. I'd also like to thank the man responsible for revitalizing downtown development over the last decade. Applause started immediately. Loud, enthusiastic, respectful. Much louder than anything Daniel had received all evening. Interesting, very interesting. The giant screen behind him lit up. A logo appeared, Caldwell Urban Holdings. One of the largest commercial real estate companies in the state. Maybe the largest. They owned office towers, retail centers, apartment complexes, entire city blocks. Everyone knew the company. Nobody knew its owner. The founder was notoriously private, almost invisible. No interviews, no public appearances, no photographs, just rumors and money, lots of money. Daniel smiled. Tonight, for the first time, our city has the privilege of welcoming the founder of Caldwell Urban Holdings in person. The crowd erupted, people stood, reporters grabbed cameras. Donors leaned forward. My father looked practically ecstatic. Then the spotlight turned and landed directly beside me. The room froze. I froze because Nathan was standing, no, not standing, leaving. Walking calmly toward the stage, toward hundreds of stunned faces, toward absolute silence. For 1 second, nobody understood. Then understanding hit the room all at once, like a wave, like thunder. Like glass breaking, the billionaire, the founder, the invisible developer, the owner of half the city's commercial real estate, was my husband, the school janitor. The man who fixed broken lockers after class, the man who mopped hallways, the man my father called unworthy, the man they'd mocked. Nathan walked onto the stage. And 500 people rose to their feet. The applause felt endless. Around me, jaws literally dropped. Reporters scrambled. Phones appeared everywhere. Whispers exploded across the ballroom. I looked toward my family, and I'll never forget what I saw. My mother's face had gone completely white. Daniel looked like he'd forgotten how breathing worked. But my father looked hollow, not angry, not shocked, hollow, like someone had built their identity on a foundation that suddenly disappeared. Nathan stepped to the microphone. The room settled and he spoke very quietly, very professionally, no revenge speech, no humiliation, no attack, nothing dramatic. He thanked the audience, discussed development projects. Talked about affordable housing, praised local businesses, spent 15 minutes being exactly the man I'd always known him to be, kind, measured, thoughtful. Then he stepped down. That should have been the end, but my father couldn't leave it alone. He approached Nathan almost immediately. I watched it happen from 20 feet away. The desperation was visible. "Nathan," for the first time in years, my father sounded uncertain. Nathan turned, polite as ever. "Richard," my father forced a smile. "I had no idea." "I know." A painful silence followed. Then came the sentence, the one that changed everything. "We should talk." Nathan studied him, not cruelly, just honestly, about what my father swallowed. The motion looked difficult. "Family?" Nathan's expression softened, slightly, not much, just enough. Then he asked a question, one simple question, the kind that can't be argued with, the kind that exposes everything. "Which family?" My father froze because there wasn't an answer, not a truthful one, not after the wedding, not after the disowning, not after years of contempt. You can't throw someone away and then claim them when they become useful. Life doesn't work like that, neither does love. Nathan wasn't cruel, he didn't embarrass him, he didn't raise his voice. He simply walked away, and somehow that hurt more. The campaign launch ended, the headlines exploded, videos spread everywhere. The internet had a field day, but honestly, that wasn't the satisfying part. The satisfying part came later, months later, quietly. One rainy Sunday afternoon, there was a knock on our front door. I opened it and found my father standing there, alone, no audience, no donors, no lawyers, no strategy, just an aging man in a rain-soaked coat. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked down, then back up and said something I never expected to hear. I was wrong, not dramatic, not emotional, just honest. The words seemed difficult for him, painful even. I waited. I spent so much time judging people by titles that I forgot to judge them by character. Rain tapped softly against the porch roof. Neither of us moved. You loved me when I was useful, I said quietly. His eyes closed because it was true, and truth is hard, especially when it arrives years late. I know. Another silence. Then he said something that surprised me even more. I'm trying to learn how to be better, not I've changed, not forgive me, not let's move on, just trying. The smallest honest word and somehow the most meaningful, because real change isn't dramatic, it's awkward, slow, uncomfortable, messy, the way healing always is. I didn't hug him, I didn't cry. I didn't suddenly forget everything that happened. Life isn't a movie. Pain doesn't disappear because somebody finally understands it, but I stepped aside and opened the door, not completely. Just enough. The years since then haven't been perfect. My father still struggles. My mother still hides behind appearances sometimes. Daniel and I are still figuring out whether we're capable of being siblings instead of competitors, but things are different, not because Nathan became publicly important. Not because everyone learned he was rich, not because my family got embarrassed. The real change happened because I stopped needing their approval. That's the part nobody talks about. The greatest revenge isn't making people regret hurting you. It's building a life so full, so peaceful, and so genuinely yours that their approval becomes irrelevant. These days, Nathan still spends time at Lincoln Elementary. People always find that surprising. Yes, he owns billions in real estate. Yes, he could spend every day in boardrooms. But every Thursday morning, he still helps fix broken desks. He still replaces ceiling tiles. He still walks those hallways because being useful was never an act, it was who he actually was, and me. I still design buildings. I still carry a pencil behind my ear half the time. I still stop to admire old brickwork. I still get excited about structural details nobody else notices. The difference is that now I do it for myself, not for approval, not for validation, not to prove anything, just because I love it. Sometimes in the evening, Nathan and I sit on our back porch watching the city lights come on one by one. The skyline he helped build glows in the distance. The air smells like rain and cut grass. And every now and then I think about that wedding, about the humiliation, about the disowning, about all the years I spent trying to earn love from people who treated it like a reward. Then I look at the life we've built, the peace, the honesty, the ordinary happiness, and I realize something. My parents thought they were punishing me when they cast me out. What they actually did was push me toward the life I was supposed to have all along, the life where I stopped performing, the life where I stopped begging. The life where I finally understood something that took 34 years to learn. A person's worth isn't determined by the title on their business card. It isn't determined by money, or status, or family approval. It's determined by who they are when nobody important is watching. My father looked at a janitor and saw failure. I looked at that same man and saw kindness. Only one of us was right, and in the end, that made all the difference.